Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have a really interesting episode today. We have a special guest, as you can see on the screen, Mythos Aurelius. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
We're good also. Are you good, Landon?
I'm doing great. I'm really
It's been a
excited
pretty
about this because
no,
it's a neat book that he's written, and so we want to discuss a little bit about it and introduce him and some of the concepts that he had. As I've been going through the book, it's been quite interesting.
Yeah, I guess we should start out by saying we have an author on today, and I will tell you a little bit about how I came across him. I was scrolling Reddit like I often do. I talk about that so much, it's almost like that's all I do, right? But it's not. I do other things. Anyway, I came across a post in one of the Mormon communities, post-Mormon communities. The title was New Evidence that Challenges the Authenticity of the Book of Mormon. And as our viewers and listeners know, we have podcasted in many different ways about this topic. And so that caught my eye right away. I'll just read you the first little paragraph and you'll see why I was so intrigued. Hello, exMormon community. I am a non-Mormon researcher with a strong background in textual criticism and theology. I have written a book on the many problems contained in Mormon scripture and doctrine. I am here today to share with this community some of my findings. And then the post went on with just this incredible body of work and research and information. And everybody in the post-Mormon community, I mean, there were hundreds of comments right away. Everybody was really, really intrigued. So I said, Landon, we got to figure out who this guy is. And we were able to have a really amazing phone conversation and arrange to have our discussion here so that our viewers and listeners could participate. So this is really great. So Landon started to dive into the book. Do we have the slide of the book? Let's show everybody what this is, because we definitely want people to understand, and it's on Amazon right now. It's in Kindle form right now. Is that right, Mythos?
Yeah, but probably by tomorrow it'll probably be published. I'm guessing tomorrow or the day after. It
Okay.
should be published by then.
Okay, so probably by the time this airs, you will be able to find it. And the title is, Landon, why don't you take it from here and talk about the title? Landon's had a chance to dig into this a little bit more than I have to begin with, and we're going to read a little bit of the foreword. So why don't you tell everybody what the title is and your experience starting to look into it?
Yeah, the title's called Behind the Curtain, A Critical Analysis of Mormon Theology and Doctrine. And it's by Mythos, which obviously isn't his actual name, but we'll go into that, why he has decided to not use his actual name in the book. But it's a fascinating book, because the very first thing I did as I started to read it, I read the foreword, and I went, wow, this guy nailed it, which is saying something for somebody who is not a Mormon, who's never been a Mormon. He dove in and he decided to write this book, and some of the findings that he put in the foreword were just incredible. So I'm going to read the foreword real quick here. He says, a careful analysis of the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith's foundational church reveals obvious deceptions of considerable magnitude. Joseph Smith's unearthed religious texts, his recorded theophany, and other magical claims appeared so implausible, even by 19th century standards, that it is surprising the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints maintained a defensible facade at all, both then and now. In recent years, esteemed scholars as well as investigative authors have deconstructed the faith and its tenets. What has been revealed is a current of deception that underpins Mormon dogma. It appears Joseph Smith and the subsequent church leaders have all attempted to either legitimize or conveniently discard the aberrations that demonstrate the modern rather than ancient origins of the faith. More generally, the litany of contradiction within Mormon scripture itself is bound to lead the astute to the unavoidable conclusion that the entire church is founded on intellectual quicksand. I love that comment, intellectual quicksand. Despite these efforts, apologists for the LDS church still feel they have a legitimate claim to the truthfulness of their faith. Mormon apologists will always rest on the fact that their opposition cannot prove with 100% certainty that Joseph Smith did not have some form of divine contact. This alone cannot be a panacea. If the Mormon Church wants to maintain an authoritative position on Christian history and to some extent world history, that it must welcome a closer scrutiny. When analyzing how Mormon apologists argue, it becomes apparent that they never really address the core issues and discrepancies at hand. An immediate example I can think of is the apologist position on the infamous Kinderhook plates incident. They overlooked the fact that the plates were an obvious forgery and instead focused on a single character within the plates that could match up with Joseph Smith's already dubious Egyptian translations to posit that he wasn't being deliberately deceptive. This pattern of deliberate academic ineptitude has left to a divide between those outside the faith who would acknowledge the problems for what they are, and the LDS Church's lay members who favor the apologist's explanations, even if they don't make sense. I think it's patently clear that the Mormon Church and its apologists have misled not only the public, but also its lay members. I have written this book with the intention of bringing to light truths I feel are irrefutable concerning the falsehoods present within the Mormon canon of religious texts and decrees. I would advise those who do not want their illusions of the church to be shattered to not continue reading, but for the sake of truthfulness, they should. In this work, I will first address textual errors in the Book of Mormon and will then move on to both philosophical and practical contradictions. So, as I said, I think he nailed this as he read it. It's the exact thing I've been saying. How can these apologists continue to make these arguments from such weak positions, or as he calls it, intellectual quicksand? And how do they get away with it? And so it's interesting to have Mythos on and to tell us about why he wrote the book, what he found, and kind of a little bit about his background as far as, what made him dive into Mormon theology. Because as we talked, one of the things he told me is that, he was actually trying to look for some things to support the book and some of the strong arguments and what he found as a result of that. So, Mythos, why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how you got started and what got you interested in writing this book?
Well, firstly, I would like to thank you for calling my work incredible, and I'd also like to thank the outpouring of support that I've gotten from the Reddit community. They've been really great. I've gotten a lot of support, and a lot of people have said that my work, means something to them and that they learned something from what I said. And so I'm really grateful that, I have that support. I wasn't actually sure that I thought maybe two or three people might read it or comment, but like I was really surprised that, so many people read it and so many people commented. So I would just like to thank those people for all the support that they've given me. Um, as for why I decided to write the book, you see, I research a lot of religions, a lot of, different sort of religious texts. I'm really sort of interested in, the mysteries behind, religion and these sorts of things. And um, I originally read the Book of Mormon out of curiosity. Like many years ago, I remember as a teenager, I watched the documentary The God Makers, and like I mean, it's not even though the information is accurate. Like I'm sure that the documentary is sort of positioned in a way that's not 100% balanced. But quite a few years ago, I decided that I would just, give the Book of Mormon a try. I would see what it was. And really from First Nephi, there was a lot of alarm bells. I mean, I hate to admit this, and I know that there are a lot of members that, took the faith very seriously. But for me, when I read First Nephi and I read the story about, Nephi and Laban and how him and his brothers were, running away from him, and I found it quite humorous. I thought it was quite funny. But nevertheless, I decided that I would give the work, give it an honest shot. And basically, when I read it, I came to the conclusion that there are so many different problems with it. And what really stuck out to me were the textual errors. And so I knew what the textual errors were when I read it, especially when you read the Isaiah chapters and you also read the Matthew chapters and 3 Nephi. You can see the textual errors, but like it took actually quite a while to make sure, looking through the ancient manuscripts, to be able to guarantee that the textual errors were wrong. And I also noticed a couple of other philosophical problems with the faith that I thought that I would address. So, I was actually hesitant to actually release my work because number one, I didn't really want to step on someone else's religion. I didn't want to, my aim of this wasn't to offend someone. And secondly, as impossible as the Book of Mormon is, you can never really be 100% certain that, there might not be evidence somewhere that maybe gives some degree of, validity to it. So I had to ensure that I was doing honest work and I wasn't slandering them for no reason. And the truth is that if there are any apologists out there that are listening, and you really do feel that you have information that backs up the Book of Mormon, you can really just leave it in my on my post on Reddit. Like, I'm really open. I'm still open to hearing the other side and what they have to say. And so I just felt that book really does represent forgery. It has a lot of red flags, a lot of, indications that there's a lot of problems. And I just feel that for some reason, when you look on Wikipedia or whatever, you see that the apologists have somehow positioned it that it's still in the realm of the uncertain, that, some people might think, oh, it's still possible that this could be a legitimate text. And so I thought, well, that's not really fair. Like it really, I've seen other texts that have less problems with them become disqualified as hoaxes. Like there are there's one particular text from the 19th century. It's another sort of thing similar to the Book of Mormon. It's called the Awera Linda, and it's a problematic text. It purports to be this ancient manuscript that was passed down by the ancient Germanic tribes of some pre-Christian sort of, world in Germany and the Netherlands, and it had been refuted in the 19th century as a hoax. But believe it or not, when you compare a document like that to the Book of Mormon, it looks legitimate, even though it has, problems. Like the Book of Mormon has way more problems than those texts.
Oh
So I
dear.
just felt that, that I think it was time that somebody really addressed that.
Well, we're glad you did. And I'm not at all surprised about the support that you got online because your post was just, I mean, it really spoke to everybody. A lot of people have researched a lot of different pieces, but it was very comprehensive and in such a clear and insightful and knowledgeable way that you presented it. And I think everyone was just kind of blown away that you are a never Mormon, and yet you cut right to it. You saw it so clearly. And I love that you have said to everyone, please fact check me what you just said now. Please leave it on Reddit. Please leave comments here. You want to learn, you want to know if there's something you missed. You are completely open to that. And that's the philosophy of our program too, isn't it, Landon? Please, write us, let us know. We want to get the information that's accurate out to people so they can make informed decisions about their religious faith and practices. So yeah, we're absolutely thrilled to dive into this. So how long did it take you to finish the work after you decided something needs to be done?
Well, the truth is that I've held on to this work for a few years. And I actually really just what I did first is that you see the way I sort of write is that I sort of have all the information in my head, and even if I haven't necessarily researched it, like I sort of have it stored away, and so I pretty much had the whole book in my head, and so really over a period of just a few months, I just wrote out the whole thing. But then I needed to make sure that all the information was accurate, and so I had to make sure that that everything that I said was absolutely right because like the truth is that to actually figure out that the Book of Mormon is problematic, I don't really think you need more than, let's say, like a ninth grade, level knowledge of the Greek language, really just a few ancient texts. You really don't need much. I think for those that want proof against it, if you're really open-minded, I really don't think that it would take much to really, deconstruct that belief. But because, I want to make sure that the work doesn't have any problems, that someone, can cite it and the apologist can't say, oh, well, he's wrong on this. I did go through a lot of sources that I don't think a lot of people would, turned over. Like I went to the different, not only the Greek, I looked at the Syriac, I looked at the Apocrypha. I looked at a bunch of commentaries, Origin, a bunch of the different ones, and it became also pretty undeniable to me that when you really do read those sources with the Book of Mormon in mind, it really becomes apparent that the church really doesn't resemble the early Christian church. And I think I heard once that, you have a lot of apologists that are very proud. They claim that that the Mormon church is extremely close to the New Testament church or even the old Hebrew, church. And like the truth of the matter is that it's so far. There's really no link. I mean, like right off the bat, like a lot of the early Christian church, they really sort of lionized, being single and these sorts of things. And like the Mormon church doesn't practice that at all. Like eternal marriage and these sorts of things are really, really big for them. And so yeah, I mean, I did want to bring up one thing that I noticed on my post on Reddit. I actually got my first comment from what looks like a Mormon apologist. So they read my post, and so I wanted to actually read what they wrote. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
please do.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I guarantee this is the first of many because your work is going to shake things up a little bit. So yes, please read what somebody commented.
So someone named Warthog Early 8801 said, "There are many errors in your reply. I will start with the very first two you listed, and you will have to do some more digging. It is common knowledge now that horses have been found in the Americas prior to their time mentioned in the Book of Mormon, or at least at the same time, worst case scenario. The other thing is still has existed for much longer than previously thought." I think he's referencing the steel that I mentioned
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yes.
It also is not an anachronism as you claim. And you're assuming because it's not in the Bible that there's no way Joseph simply could have known about it. There are tons of scriptures that point out many of your mischaracterizations. Much of the Bible was removed. You should know that. The Catholics still have Maccabees, and that is completely good scripture. I'm not sure why he's bringing up the Apocrypha here, but he's doing that. The
Yeah.
Apocrypha is full of good material, and there are countless thousands of other documents throughout the world, including the Middle East, from Egypt to Iran, that confirm all kinds of things that Joseph Smith has said. You have a lot of homework to do. So
Sorry.
I
Yeah. And
I
I would
responded, yeah,
Oh, I was going to say, I would say that's probably not an official church apologist, but
No.
rather a member who is true believing, who listens to what the church keeps saying, and they'll always tell
Yes.
you, oh, there's plenty out there that backs this up,
Right.
and yet they won't tell you what that is, or nor will they ever use it to back something up clearly and academically. And as a result, you get a lot of people out there who just quote it and say it without
Right.
knowing what's in any of the things that they're quoting or referring to.
Kind of
Uh,
armchair apologist, and
yes.
even just the things that he went through. There is you'll get a sort of a kick out of this. There's a website called Scripture Central or Book of Mormon Central. I don't know if you've
yeah,
seen
I'm
that yet,
familiar with it.
but it's very full. They pride themselves that they've knocked out almost all the anachronisms. And so the way this person's responding to you, the horses, the steel, this is textbook what they are presenting on their site. And their motto there is that we Book of Mormon Central, Scripture Central will do what the church can't. And that means
Yeah,
they will give some pretty desperate apologetics. But as Landon said, the common member will look at that and go, okay, I think that makes sense. And of course, when you want something to make sense to you, it has to make sense in order to keep your faith, that you're going to get a post like that. So yeah, what did you write back? I'm so curious.
so I said, "I'm glad a Mormon has finally showed up. I know your position on the horses, and that is why I didn't base my argument on the anachronisms. If you read the rest of my post, you would see that. I also reference the Apocrypha in my main work. Please address my main points." And then I further say, "By the way, can you provide a source for the pre-Columbian horses? It was my understanding that the Nephites were actually riding tapirs, according to the scholarship of the church."
Oh,
So,
yeah, that will make them cranky for sure. No, horses is one of the few things that they really, boy, they trot that out. There's a new video put out by Book of Mormon Central. It's called A Marvelous Work, The Greatness of the Evidence. And the whole video is very slick, very highly produced. Lots of money went into it. And they're globe-trotting looking for evidence. And in their first episode, they did, look at horse bones. But of course, we all know it was a Pleistocene horse. It was a teeny tiny little horse. The dates come from the ground around it. There's a lot of contamination. The
yeah.
horses, and also it was discovered by a BYU scientists.
Yeah.
Not saying that couldn't happen. So, but again, the common member is going to hear an authority say, no, we discovered horse bones, and it's fine. They literally check it off as something that they would be concerned with. So this is a perfect example.
This is
Yeah.
one of the cases, Mythos, where exactly what you said in your foreword is what the case is, you know, how does the church get away with this? And if you do a search on horses in the New World, the first 25 articles that come up are about this horse bone that was found by BYU. The church has
And they're from the
billions of
church.
dollars,
Yeah.
and they spend a lot of money on the SEO to drive their narrative up to the top, so you don't get to any scientific journals for quite some time before you start seeing that the entire scientific world says this is all craziness. But
Yeah.
but BYU touts it as this is, you know, we found it, and they'll take these anachronisms and they'll say it's been debunked. What they find doesn't have to be in the right place, the right time. They just have to make some shred of connection. They say, oh, this anachronism is debunked. We debunked it. And they're the ones debunking it, not science. They're the ones who are saying that it's debunked. But one of the things I really liked about what you did that's different than what we see a lot of times, as as Mormons, one of our favorite things to do was to have somebody from the outside compliment the Book of Mormon, because that somehow proved that it was true. That they said, "Oh
Yeah.
my goodness, I read this and that was, you know, it touched me," or I read this and I saw how that might relate to this, and they go, "See, the Book of Mormon's true."
Right.
And we always think that everybody on the outside of the church just is just looking to know that this is true, and that as soon as they read it, they'll recognize it as truth. So what you're presenting here is harmful or hurtful to Latter-day Saints to all of a sudden say, wait a minute, someone doesn't think this is true from outside? And one of the things I
Yeah.
really like that you did is you're using the actual, you go back and you're using a lot of the founding fathers of Christianity, and you're using references to them to make some of the explanations, which most Mormons don't even know who any of these people are. You know, the founding Polycarp, Origen, the different founding Irenaeus, the different founding fathers of Christianity. You reference those and say, well, here's, you know, the church is referencing them as they need to, but they're ignoring their I don't they're ignoring
Context of
the context
Yes.
of what they're
yeah.
really saying. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there is one quick thing I wanted to address. I noticed something in his response, that he brought up the fact that like a lot of the books of the Bible, like the Apocrypha, have been removed. And I think he made that statement because I think that because I do textual criticism, I think some people think I'm an evangelical or a Protestant. And I did want to address that I won't say my background, but like I was never raised Protestant. I'm not a evangelical. I have no affiliations. Like I'm not specifically that. You know, I wasn't raised in that church. But one thing I did want to mention is that like regarding the early Christianity and the Apocrypha and these sorts of things is that it is quite difficult to really ascertain what the doctrine of the original church was. Like whenever you wade into the sort of the waters of like what's a Christian, you know, that's sort of a little bit dangerous territory because everybody has an opinion specifically about, you know, whether someone, you know, like whether the early church was more Protestant, whether it was more Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. But the number one thing that I found amongst all of it is that the majority of the early church um, is that like the one thing that you notice is that they do textual criticism and they do sort of present quite differently than the Mormons, in that a lot of the early authorities that unlike later Christianity where there was sort of an orthodoxy that was established, in early Christianity there was a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions. And this isn't really a hard proof, but to me, they were actually, you know, when you read the Didache and whatever, they were actually kind of a little bit open-minded. And so the number one way that the Mormon church really does differ from the early church is that they're extremely dogmatic and that the baptisms have to be exactly a specific way. Their prayers have to be exactly a specific way. And a lot of the early churches that they were trying to figure stuff out. And so you see that there is a sort of a disconnect, and that the Mormon church believes that, through revelation that the early church probably would have been perfect. But, there's really no evidence that even the early apostles or whatever weren't, they weren't always totally on the same page. It's to me, this is sort of a personal opinion, but as someone's really that's really interested in sort of the ancient Greek history and whatever, you see that even though Jesus was, born, probably Aramaic speaking and probably among, the Jews in Israel, there's to me, I know some people might disagree with this, but there's definitely a bit of a philosophical, sort of a Hellenistic sort of little bent to early Christianity. And quite ironically, it's that specific bent that the Mormon Church has said is the great apostasy, the idea that philosophy or other ideas influence the church. And, from my vantage point, like nothing could be further from the truth. I feel that these people in early antiquity were very bright. I feel that they were scholarly, and I think that, they had their scriptures and they were trying to reconcile them with the natural world and the way things were. Um, I was going to say that I've actually watched one of the podcasts you sent me with John Lundwall.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's a very bright scholar. I was really impressed with his work. And one thing that really stood out to me is that how the ancient people sort of communicated. They didn't have printing presses, they didn't have these sorts of things. And so that totally changed the way that they saw the world and interacted with it. I think Victor Hugo once said that the printing press killed architecture. And so when you look at the ancient temples, you look at Solomon's temple, you look at the ancient, Roman or Greek temples, that they didn't have printing presses, but they sort of expressed their, what they felt was important. They sort of expressed it in stone. And so they sort of had a very, it sort of created a sort of a beauty to what they were doing, and that they sort of saw, the world as sort of very, harmonious, and sort of their ideas were kind of reflected in the writings that they had. But the Mormon Church, a lot of what they talk about is these are edicts. Like, that's why every prophet sort of has a different thing. Brigham Young, has his worldview, and Joseph Smith has his thing going on. It's just edicts, it's just opinions. It's not really like a collective group of people said, this is something we hold as true, and then, it's sort of verified it. It just sort of just came out of nowhere, Mormonism. And so, like, that's just sort of my take. I know that some people might say, well, that doesn't necessarily prove that it's not true, and you could argue that, but that's just sort of my opinion on it.
Yeah, again, I think, don't you think, Landon, you're just hitting the nail on the head every time. And it's true, as Mormons, there's a lot that you are required to study of your own immediate history, the Joseph Smith era. And most Mormons do not know a lot about the early church or any of this. And in fact, we found, Landon and I, we run a book club for post-Mormons called the Good Book Club. And we do try to read books about that era just because we know so little. Have you ever heard of the Carpocratians?
I've heard of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're our favorite group because their ideology is that they must experience every, I don't know if I'd call it sin, I'd call it experience as hedonistic, anything in life. And if you don't experience everything, then you try again and again. So we always think that sounds like an awfully fun religion to
Yeah.
have to keep trying everything. But no, this perspective is so valuable because I personally know several people that have joined the church because they really, and I'm talking about close relatives, they really do feel this is the original church. This is the church from early Christianity. And I don't know, what is it that you think that they see in Mormonism that makes them think that? Or is it just that they're taught that by missionaries and it's all skewed that way? Because I've always been curious about that. But I know many people really feel everything that existed in the early Christian church that was meant to be the true church is found here and in no other.
Well, the one thing that I've always felt reading the New Testament, the Bible, like there is a little bit of a flaw in it. And that when you do read it, a lot of the times there are a lot of lines in the Bible that sort of suggest that it's kind of like there is a bit of a polarization, a sort of a, when you look at, Christ and the Pharisees, there is a sort of there is a bit of an us versus them. And so if somebody reads the scripture and they read it from the vantage point that they want to validate their worldview, you can validate any possible worldview. Like, you can read it and you can say, oh, like a Protestant could read it and say, oh, the Catholics are sort of Pharisees, and a Catholic could read it and say, the Protestants are Pharisees. And so Mormonism, they don't really rely so much on scholarship. They don't really say, oh, we want to know the objective truth about this. They will simply run to the scriptures and say, there must be something that verifies something we do. And so, yeah, I mean, there's some, similarities. Like, Mormons practice baptism, and the early Christians practice baptism. And so, just because there are some similar practices doesn't mean that that church really does reflect anything, because they're omitting all the information that says that they have nothing to do with that. And if you do that, you can probably fit any sort of religion, into Christianity.
That's a great point, because it's a very Mormon thing to do, and maybe it's a very other religion thing to do as well. But Mormons write their history just like Joseph Smith, or they write their doctrine just like Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon. They go and they take pieces from wherever they can find it and piece it together and make an argument for something without understanding any concept behind it. That the correlation of the church, that's something that they do very much. I remember sitting in Sunday school, and we were studying celestial marriage. And where did they
Hmm.
go for celestial marriage? They went to Abraham to show that Abraham had a celestial marriage. And I'm going, Abraham, he had a handmaiden, he had a polygamous marriage, and he sent his one wife off into the desert with their son to die. How is how is that an example
Yeah,
of celestial marriage? He wasn't married in a temple. There wasn't any sealing power discussed. None of this. But he was married, and he had,
Yeah.
all of us came from him. The covenant children all came from him. Therefore, that's what it is. And so they take these ideas, and the lost scriptures is a good one that you just pointed out. That actually comes from an article of faith. We talk about we believe the Bible as far as it's been translated correctly. Well, that's an easy cop out, that as soon as there's something that doesn't agree with the Bible, you say that was mistranslated, or there's books missing. And I think anyone who's read Bart Ehrman, First Lost Christianities, where he talks about how the church was never one church, it was multiple Christianities, multiple faith
yeah,
traditions, like you talked about. That even the apostles, they all seem to have started their own church almost, or their own philosophical branch. And Mormons don't recognize that. They believe that Jesus just started a church that looks exactly like the church that they have, and that's what they followed. So it's interesting to hear you say that, and it's easy to point out, oh well, that was just lost from the Bible. That's why we don't have it. And Joseph Smith then just goes and writes it in his translation of the Bible, which is a
Exactly.
translation with no. He's not even looking at the text. He's just putting words into the Bible
yeah,
to make it match. And they don't realize that the reason that the Bible was written by the winner. So what is missing from the Bible isn't the things that make it most like Christianity today. What's missing is the things that made it most unlike Christianity today, like the carpocratians and their crazy ideas.
yeah.
Those didn't win out; those got
Don't
taken
call
out.
them
Not
crazy.
the Yeah, not the common thing. But one of the titles of your you talk about textual errors in the Book of Mormon, but one of the other parts is about the moral bankruptcy of Mormon philosophy. Uh, can you talk a little bit about that, and what you mean by that, or what you
Well, that specific, that's where in that section, I talk entirely about the contradiction between infant deification and free will. Section deals pretty much exclusively with that. You see, even though I put it in short form in my post, it's a very complex argument. It's very complex because the Mormon Church secretly, Joseph F. Smith knew that there were numerous problems with this whole idea of children being forced to become gods. And he actually wrote extensively about it. And a lot of Mormons don't know this. It's really buried in their record. And so he doesn't directly address it, but you can see that he's trying to address it. And so what I basically talk about there is that there is a lot of problems with the way that the end of things, like eschatology deals with the end of the world, the final judgment, who goes where. There's just a lot of moral bankruptcy to it. So I guess I could read one section from the appendix where I do bring up an example unrelated to children and them, being forced to become gods. So, well,
Just one clarification. When you say children forced to become gods, you're talking about those who die before they're 8, who the Mormon
before they're 8.
philosophy is they immediately become saved and receive an eternal salvation, correct?
Yeah, I'm talking about that. And the funny thing is that if you stop and think about it, like I was thinking, I don't know how many of there's this religion, it's called the Sikh religion, it's from India. And so I was reading about these kids, I think in the 1700s, that were martyred for their Sikh religion in India. They were captured by their Muslim overlords. And so one kid was 6 and one kid was 9. And so both kids, and one kid I think was 7 and one kid was 9. And both kids were said, convert to Islam or we're gonna, execute you. And so they basically, both brothers of the Sikh religion, and they were held up as martyrs later on, said, no, 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 we're not going to convert to your religion. So they were executed. And so I was thinking, so both of these boys have no idea about Mormonism. They don't believe in Mormonism. They believe in their Sikh religion. And they probably died heroic deaths for their religion. But in the afterlife, the one boy that is 7 years old is going to be an automatic god. He's not going to be practicing Sikhism in his, post, mortal life. And there's no other option. He can't not choose to be a god in Mormonism. But then the 9-year-old, who probably, also probably was a morally upright, young child that, died for his faith or whatever, probably is going to reject the angel to baptize them and is probably going to end up in a much lower kingdom for absolutely no reason whatsoever, even though they're both children. And so, like, to me, that seems like there's something wrong with that. But I just wanted to read one part of my book to just demonstrate just how bankrupt Mormon eschatology is. So, the following is purely my opinion, but I feel to share it in relation to this particular objection. So, the objection that I'm talking about is the objection that what if, for example, a Mormon might say everybody gets to the celestial kingdom except people that really don't want it. So, if LDS doctrine is true, then some rather strange individuals would be exalted to godhood. Consider the following 3 absurd scenarios. Number 1, you are a drug cartel boss. You live a life that involves greed, partying, and torturing your enemies. You have zero belief in any religion. You die in a gunfight and wake up in Mormon spirit prison. You are proxy baptized by an LDS missionary, and, on a whim, your spirit joins the church because it has nothing to lose. You start doing whatever the angel says in a very mechanical fashion. Because your drug cartel wife also converted, you are proxy married. Since you had a token baptism, you are given kingdoms, power, and glory in the resurrection. Angels of heaven encircle you, praising your holiness and godliness. Number 2, you are a well-known atheist and scientist that makes a living criticizing religion. You live to a ripe old age as a single man. After you die, you end up in Mormon spirit prison. You then realize you are completely wrong because you have concrete proof of an afterlife. You agree to do whatever the angel says just to get out of spirit prison. However, you won't become a god because you never had the chance to marry. Number 3, you are a 3rd century Christian martyr who died a horrible death in the name of Christ. You are a pious, holy, and righteous individual. However, because you weren't baptized by someone with the right priesthood authority due to the great apostasy, you sit in spirit hell for 2,000 years. Also, since your name is lost to time, you will miss the morning of the first resurrection. An angel approaches you during the millennial reign and says, due to a baptismal technicality, you are actually not a Christian. Become a Mormon and we can fix that for you. You reject the angel not because you don't believe in Christ, but because Paul in the Bible says to be wary of angels that preach alternative gospels. That's in Galatians 1:8. You are cast into the celestial kingdom and have no glory in comparison with the drug lord in scenario one. So, do you kind of see how there's a bit of a problem with the way Mormon eschatology kind of works? Like,
Yes, most post-Mormons are certainly aware when you really think things through. And those are great examples because they're not the same examples that we use, Landon, are they? But they're right in line with the kinds of things that we say. In fact, we often say we're so unlucky, this teeny tiny percent, to have been born into this religious construct, because somebody, like you said, who just lives their life and then later decides, I want to be a part of this, it seems like they would be exalted right away. The rest of us can, because of the truth supposedly that we have or knew or gave up, we can be in a lot of trouble, can't we, Landon?
Yeah, absolutely. Just the smallest things like
Yeah.
neglecting to show up to church every
Yeah.
week will
Drinking
throw you
coffee.
out, where someone else who never, who, like you said, the drug lord can make it to the celestial kingdom if he
Yeah,
just accepts it and changes his ways after the fact. I think as a missionary, that was one of the things we taught as a strength was, well, it's not fair that you go to heaven or hell. Because it's kind of like that 8-year-old argument. If you're just off of this side, you go to hell, and if you're just on this side of the line, you go to heaven. How fair is that? But Mormondom gives you multiple kingdoms, so
that's
we
right.
can more
Wiggle
accurately
room.
grade the percent
yeah,
kingdom that you get to go to,
Right.
and so there's different levels for different levels of righteousness. To me, they all fall apart because of that very reason. How does one guy who's just slightly better than another guy get eternal glory, and the other guy, it burns in hell forever? So I think there's some bankruptcy all the way around in that philosophy.
Yeah, and we just read the other day, remember, Landon, this thought we hadn't really come up with before, that how crowded is the celestial kingdom going to be? Because throughout time and history, children that die under the age of 8, there's an awful lot, like a
yeah.
huge percentage. And if most that we can't even comprehend, because as you said, before time, before record keeping. And so if you think you're going to have room to, spread out in the celestial kingdom, it's already packed just by humanity, the infant death and mortality of children under the age of 8, if you follow that through. So a lot of it falls apart if you just think logically, even for a few minutes. You're thinking, how can that be? But then of course, then you return to feelings. A lot of us were raised on it, and it has significance and feelings to you, and you can't argue with feelings. There is no argument if that's what you're going to hang your hat on. So,
I was just
um, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that one thing that I think hasn't also been thought through is that you see the Mormon plan of salvation relies on agency, like free will. And so this is free will that can't be like God can't all of a sudden say, okay, you're now in the celestial kingdom, you don't have free will. And so I take it that in the theology, that the big idea is supposed to be is that once you become exalted to godhood, you become a god over another world and you populate it with, spirit children. But there is a problem in that because it would be one thing, for example, if the only people that made it to the celestial kingdom are Mormon, but you have the problem that you're literally having, people from all over the world, different Muslims and people that probably had, nothing to do with the church. And so, it may very well be that they may, in the afterlife, they may convert to Mormonism, but there's no
Yeah.
guarantee that if they were to be made gods, that they wouldn't run their kingdoms totally differently than, the God that's, up there. And so the funny thing is that I remember once reading an Origin, the Mormon apologists like Origin because he believes in a premortal existence as well. But the thing is that he once wrote that just imagine, like he says that he thinks it's one of the most absurd things imaginable that people could use that particular doctrine to believe that there's multiple worlds and multiple gods and multiple atonements, and it's just the idea of that particular idea is utterly absurd. And so I think that it basically the reason why it's absurd is for precisely that reason, that if you were to have all these different gods, it would just be just chaotic. I mean, with all this free will and different people making it there, and I don't
Yeah,
know.
and
It
that
just doesn't work
doctrine,
for me.
exactly. That doctrine has really been dialed back. People of Landon and my age or older, we were definitely taught that, weren't we, Landon? That, if you make it to the top, you will have your own planet. You will be able to populate it. In more recent years, because people are thinking it through, it really has been dialed back. And if you read the Gospel Topics essays, which is a series of essays where they try to dig into some of these questions in a very apologetic way, they definitely say we didn't necessarily say that, not everyone will be that. You'll sort of be in the celestial kingdom. It's all very nebulous. Nobody knows, but they're trying to dial that back. And I believe it's just because it's so problematic when you really, really think it through. So, Landon, what were some of the other? I know you had a chance to read through more of the chapter headings and more. One of the other points about the Book of Mormon that you wanted to bring up in some of the observations, they were just so spot on. And we'll link this Reddit post to everyone in the show notes because it's kind of taken on a life of its own with people writing back and forth. Like I said, hundreds of comments, and the post is just so good. It'll give you a teaser for the whole book. It's just amazing.
Well, it wasn't so much Book of Mormon if I that I was looking at as the point you were saying about how apologists will just cherry pick the ideas that they want from these different people. And as you just said, and I could be saying his name wrong. Origin, mentions that there were spirits before, and so LDS apologists will point to that and say, "See, that's what he said," and so that was an early Christian belief. But Origen might just as well have said, that there's only one God, that there's not three different beings. And
Well,
so in that case, he doesn't agree with what they say. And as a result, they just cherry pick. If somebody says it, they say it as if this person's an authority. But at the same time, that person is a heretic because he's arguing something completely different than what the church says. So what is it? Is he a heretic or is he a saint? Which one do we believe? And they seem to do that with so many different areas
yeah.
where they cherry pick those things, put them in and use that as proof without the backup or the overall context as we talked about. And I thought you did a great job from the parts that I was reading to cover that particular issue. And you seem to, in your forward, have indicated that that was something that you saw over and over, was that they're using these half truths or these philosophies that just don't work to make an argument in support of the church.
Yeah. Well, like I mean, the thing is that I was gonna mention that like with regard to like Origin and like Platon and all these other ones, is that I think that the number one doctrine that the Mormon Church doesn't find evidence for is that a lot of the early Christians did believe in a type of ex nihilo creation, that there's sort of God and then there's sort of like, even if God is eternal, but the what he created is sort of even if we derive from God, it's at a point in time. And so, like a lot of the early Christians didn't believe their doctrine that there's a part in my book where I basically say that the Mormon God happens to be all things at once. He's deist, theist, pantheist, and atheist. He's deist in the sense that he's supposed to abide by eternal laws to become God. He's theist in that, you hear stories about Mormons where God helps them start their car to get to church. He's pantheist, because when you look at Smith's theology, he believed that he was a monist, meaning that there's only matter in the universe, and so he believed that God derives from matter. It's sort of a bit of a pantheist position. And he's atheist in that there's only exalted beings. There's actually not a God that's like the creator of everything. There's only other people that have become gods. You know what I mean? It's an endless sort of chain up of people that were human and then somehow became God. as far as I can tell, there's really no evidence of like, even though there's multiple mini gods, it's not like a grand sort of god. And even if there was one, we would assume that he also, did the temple stuff and became a god through his own free will sort of thing, right?
Yeah, it never ends
There is
is
one.
their argument. It's without beginning or end, the eternal circle of gods who there was never a beginning, never an end of godhood is the argument that they would make. Yep.
Yeah, there is one thing I didn't mention this in my book. I didn't want to go after the witnesses to the Book of Mormon, the three witnesses and the eight witnesses.
Yes.
Um, but like one thing that I noticed about I'm going to first address the three witnesses, and in particular Oliver Cowdery. There's one contradiction. So they basically maintain that the witnesses never denied their testimony. This seems to be a thing that they really go off of. But to me, I think that there's something a lot worse than denying the testimony here that doesn't make sense. So, one thing that I learned was that so Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith in the Kirtland Temple, they saw God, and they saw other members of from the Bible, from the New Testament and the Old Testament. They saw God, the creator of heaven and earth, a supernatural being with a lot of power. And so this is the same being. So Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith both saw God, they saw God. And this God had told Joseph Smith that all other creeds and churches are abominations. And then what happens is that down the road, Oliver Cowdery leaves the church and then joins Methodism.
Yeah.
And so there's an enormous problem in that because think about it from, the first person perspective, right? You were basically told by this supernatural being that that particular church is an abomination. I don't think you would feel safe walking into the doors of that Methodist church. I think you'd worry that you would drop dead. Like if you really did see God and he did tell you that that church was an abomination, I don't think that you would want to go anywhere near that church. And they might say, "Oh, Peter denied his testimony or whatever." It's not like there was any duress. He literally, of his own free will, went there, and to me, that just makes absolutely no sense because if you read, like, for example, the book of Acts, you have these two people that were supposed to be giving money to the New Testament church, and they withheld their money, and God basically made them gave up the ghost, which means die basically. And so you would think that Oliver Cowdery, having some knowledge of the Bible or whatever, there's absolutely no way he would risk it. There'd be no way he would risk joining a church after God, the God, told him that's an abomination. To me, that's impossible. To me, he didn't need to deny his testimony. For me, that action proves
Yes.
that there's absolutely no possible way that he saw God. And as for the other witnesses, I can't remember if it's eight witnesses or something like that. The ones that claim that they saw the plates. So I'm a person that is interested in antiques and antiquities and these sorts of things and sort of valuables that are, gold and whatever from like centuries ago. And one thing that you see on the antique market about the 1800s is that people were incredibly adept at forging antiquities. They were in the 1800s, you had, I don't know what skill set people had back then, but they were really good at forging antiquities to the point where today, not only are the antiquities from the 1800s that are forgeries valuable, but they're almost impossible to tell. Like if somebody in the 1800s wants to, you know, fake a Middle Ages, ring or something, it's really hard to tell whether it's from the 1800s or not. And so, to me, it's not considering that most of the witnesses that saw the plates were not like super educated in antiquities or whatever. I absolutely believe someone as smart as Smith could forge plates. They were doing this in the 1800s. There was tons of people that made fake antiquities. I think even Smith was duped by the Kinderhook plates, and
Yeah.
there was this Vori plates guy,
Yes.
James Strang, I
Yep.
believe his name was.
Yep. The Springite.
And so if the founder was duped by fake plates, there's no guarantee that Smith's plates were genuine. And even if Smith had genuinely found plates, I'm surprised at the church how it hasn't crossed their mind that quite possibly, considering Smith's reputation, possibly people were even pranking Smith. I'm not saying that. It's probably he forged them, but like even if he did find them, there's no guarantee that someone didn't prank him and then he decided to just write a book about it. And without them, like I don't know how they think that these witnesses are proof of anything. Like uh it's not proof. And they're really bad. There's other witnesses of other things in history, and like there's much better witnesses. This is not a good account in my opinion. But yeah,
That's
I
so
didn't put
great to
that
see
in.
this outsider perspective on that because it's true. And a lot of those witnesses later witnessed to things that were not so complimentary to Joseph Smith. And of course, those are never considered. It's only when it's something positive. So, were you aware that Joseph Smith's associate, Parley P. Pratt, was a tinsmith? We often think, he had access to people who knew how to
Yeah.
fabricate things like that. So, yeah, it's a very good argument, and from your perspective, you're sort of saying, why haven't people thought about this? And there's a reason for that. It just is all wrapped up in this spiritualism and the testimony and the feeling, and you just don't look that hard. Would you say that how it is, Landon, that an outsider can look in and say, this is so obvious?
Yeah, it's amazing because you're taught not to
Yeah,
question, you're
yeah,
taught not to look at outside sources. So when you only look at one source, of course, it becomes just ingrained in who you are. You don't question you don't question who you are when you wake up every day. But when you finally do sit back and start asking yourself some of the tough questions, you might not like what you see. And that's exactly the way it is with uh, with the Book of Mormon and with the church history is when you start really looking deep into it and sit back and think about it, you start seeing some things that you don't like. And I think it's interesting to see someone from an outside perspective who can look at that and just say, well, this is ridiculous
yes.
right from the outbreak. You don't have to do anything. Now, one of the things we talked about when we were talking yesterday, I think it was uh, you had talked about that you wanted to actually try to put some things in the book that maybe were things you couldn't debunk or things that you felt might be strong evidences of the Book of Mormon. Um, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I did. You're asking me whether I would have wanted to put something in the Book of Mormon that's about the Book of Mormon that substantiates it.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
you mentioned that in our phone call that you had
Yeah.
wanted to do that, be fair and say these are more credible. This seems more ridiculous. Yeah, I thought what you talked about was
Yeah.
interesting.
Okay. So, one of the evidences that I think that they've trotted out that sort of they it's this thing called word print analysis. I don't know if you've heard of it. And so basically there's I think these people I'm not sure if it's BYU, but it probably is. They claim that they uh did a statistical analysis on the Book of Mormon, and they determined that there were multiple authors that wrote the book. So they claim that it's proof that like Ether and Nephi and these ones were written by different people. Now the funny thing is that I don't really consider this proof because I actually agree with the underlying premise that I actually do think that there's multiple authors of the Book of Mormon. There's Adam Clarke, there's John Calvin,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of other Protestants probably that are in there, but there's probably more beyond my work. And so there's the King James Bible, but it's particularly not good evidence because to me, I would actually expect the word print analysis to confirm really just a small number of authors, maybe even one, because it was dictated to Smith directly. He didn't actually have the original language. It's not from the original plates that were written by allegedly different people. It comes from a single source. And, somebody that like when you read the English versions, like when you read the Tyndale Bible, you read the Wycliffe Bible, for me, if I'm reading a Bible that's not a modern one, I can immediately tell probably what era it came from by the words and the diction. And with the Book of Mormon, quite frankly, I see that it comes probably from the 19th century. Like it's apparent to me that I don't really see these multiple authors as I think they're trying to put it. What you see is you see that like you see it's somebody in the 19th century trying to imitate someone in the 17th century.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also some phrasing that you see the same in the Book of Mormon as Doctrine and Covenants. And obviously, the Doctrine and Covenants wasn't written by, Nephi or whatever. Um, and so, yeah, like to me, I just see that there's an enormous problem there, and that like that's one of their number one evidences that they claim that they have, that there's multiple authors. But like to me, I just don't see it. Every single book looks like, even with the King James Version, like I believe that in the New Testament they call Isaiah Ezeas, and which is the Greek. And in the Old Testament, they just refer to him as Isaiah, which means that you can see that probably different translators probably, there was probably a few different translators that contributed to the King James Version. But with the Book of Mormon, I see a lot of consistency. And where you do see different authors is when you see he's either quoting the Bible or he's quoting probably, like Adam Clarke or one of the influences that he had. And I think other people have also found, influences from like the late war, first book of Napoleon. Like there's definitely evidences in that regard too. And so to me that really didn't seem compelling. And so I would actually want some sort of proof like that. And so, like, take for instance, I was looking for this. So when I was doing my research, there are selectively some records of how the New Testament was in the second century. So you have Jerome, he was the translator of the Latin Vulgate. Um, he basically did an analysis of the like he did some textual criticism. And so he made some comments, some marginal comments about what some of his very early sources found. So, for instance, in Matthew 7:23, which is the same as 3 Nephi 14:23, I believe, somewhere in 3 Nephi 14. In the original wording from the New Testament, there was this thing called the Gospel of the Nazarenes, which was this, apparently it was used by the early Christians. It was an early gospel source. So originally Matthew 7:23 read, if ye be in my bosom, but do not the will of my Father in heaven, out of my bosom I will cast you. And so there's various reasons why that was omitted, that I won't really get into here. But I was looking, seeing it as it didn't really contradict Mormon theology, I was wondering, is this in the Book of Mormon? Because if it was, and I know that Smith probably wouldn't have had access to the Gospel of the Nazarenes, I was thinking, well, if it's in the Book of Mormon, it might mean that maybe there is something to it. But lo and behold, no, he follows the King James version into error. He doesn't reflect the oldest version. And so it's supposed to be a restored text, but it doesn't really restore anything. Like if I found something like that, I don't know, probably I would have to, I'd probably have to retract my book. But really, and all the research I did, there's not a single thing that made me pause and say, yeah, it's a possibility, but nothing at all. So I'm waiting. If they have some evidence like that that really does prove it, I'd be willing to hear it. It'd have to be something major. It can't just be something, something coincidental. Yeah.
And that's a point that a lot of post-Mormons point out, exactly what you just said, is that you've got this book where Jesus visits the Americas and has the chance to clarify all of the problems in the Bible, to tell all of the things that have been lost from the Bible that were missing when he gives these, repeats his sermons and his different things. And what we get is exactly what's already in the Bible. So
Yeah. Yeah.
in the King James Bible is what we
Yes.
get, is exactly what's already in the King James Bible. So if stuff had been removed or stuff had been taken out, as the claim was earlier, here was Jesus's chance to put it back in and make it right. And instead, we get exactly the same thing as what he said in the King James Version.
Yeah, and there is one other thing I wanted to touch on, and that is the fact that the Book of Mormon, it doesn't actually have a civilization to call its own. Like every single source Smith took from, he takes from the ancient Jews, from the ancient Christians, from the Egyptians, with the Book of Abraham, and I think most recently it's the Mayan civilization that they've really tried to sort of glom onto. And so I know that there's scholars out there, like I know Sorensen, Mormon's Codex. I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
Yeah.
Like he basically thinks that, oh, there's a bunch of coincidences between, Mayan, civilization, and, the Dresden Codex, and, all these sorts of things, and that, there's some coincidences, between these, various documents. But like the major point that I feel is sort of missed when people do, when the church really does put forward this idea that the Book of Mormon has anything to do with Mesoamerica, is that the Book of Mormon ends in the 5th century, but we literally have the inscriptions and some of the writings. Like we have like evidence. We have the Mayan language deciphered, and we actually have records of what, the kings and whatever were doing in the 5th century in the, in the Mayan civilization, in Palenque and whatever. And there's not one mention of the Book of Mormon, anything, not, baptism or baptism of the dead, or Nephi, or not one. And so when you look at Christianity, like for example, in the 5th century in Europe and whatever, it left, when you look at the Byzantines, or even the Muslims, had something to say about Jesus. You had so many different evidences that that Christianity existed, and it continued to be such a huge presence for 1,000 years. And yet the Book of Mormon has an even more integrated, even more Protestant sort of theology. And like simply it's just vanished entirely from the record, that they have the inscriptions, they have, we know that the Mayan civilization preceded and succeeded the period in the Book of Mormon. And there's just no mention. Like it's a civilization that had some method of writing, and you would think that anything would come up if it was this huge, something about Jesus, something about, any ordinance or anything. And, I'm sure that they try to find a way to look at the temples and say, oh, they could be Mormon temples. But,
We do.
um, like again, like, they kind of gloss over the fact that they actually do have a writing system, and they don't mention any of this once. And so it kind of rules it out. It's just not possible that it's in, Mesoamerica.
Yeah, and that's why your point of view, again, you just see it so clearly, and you just sort of go, yeah, this is unusual. And when Landon and I were growing up, the Book of Mormon, we were taught that they were the only people in the Americas. They arrived here with no one else on the land, and they were all of these civilizations. Now, of course, DNA evidence has become problematic, and the kind of things that you're touching on. So now the narrative is they were among the peoples that were already there. In fact, so small that there absolutely is no trace anywhere. But of course, anybody that understands how civilizations unfold, even a smaller group is going to have an impact, especially a group having experiences like that. And that's where we talk about Dr. John Lundwell's research, where that kind of makes it clear. But again, the narrative is just don't look. And have you followed at all the Heartland model? That's also where they've kind of gravitated. If it's not in Mesoamerica, perhaps it's more in the heartland, where Joseph himself said everything took place,
Yeah.
right around the area that his was. And the church's official statement, which is so funny, and I think to somebody looking in from the outside would find it hilarious, they literally say, we take no position on where it occurred. It just leaves it up to the members to try to decide for themselves. And this video that we described earlier, A Marvelous Work, The Greatness of the Evidence, in the first episode, they literally said the Book of Mormon could be anywhere. It could be in anyone's backyard. So anyone all over the world can wake up in the morning, I think they said, and look outside in their backyard and think, the Book of Mormon could have been here. Of course, that makes it goosebumps and very accessible to people, but that's just not reality. And we know that the Book of Mormon has to be historical in order for all of Mormonism to work. Again, one of those things you don't necessarily think through. So that's why your perspective is so valuable to us, just the way you're so straightforward in stating everything. And you're right, common sense. You are the point of view of common sense that a lot of us who have a hard time being raised in Mormonism, seeing through our silo that we still sort of exist in. Do you agree with that, Landon?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that interested me so much as I was looking through this, was to just see an outsider's view, because for those of us raised in it, we don't know how an outsider would view this, and so it was interesting. And the book is not very long; it's only like 100 pages long, so it's a quick read. and yet it has important aspects of just, hey, someone reading this or thinking about this is going to come up with these questions as
Common
they're reading
sense.
it. And church, if you can't answer these, simple questions that people might have as they're reading through it, how can we make a claim that it's historical when we can't even answer where it happened at? That makes it very difficult for anyone to believe.
Right. Well, the answer to that, of course, again, I'll go back to the video, A Marvelous Work, about the strength of the evidence. Almost every section where they do present some evidence says, most of them have already been, debunked. They will just say, of course, the real evidence is pray about it, feel it, think about it. How do you feel? That's really where they have to hang their hat. And they're not wrong in that. I mean, I'm not going to tell somebody, most of my family members believe in it very strongly. What am I going to say to them? They believe it. There is absolutely nothing that anyone's going to say or point out that's going to change those feelings that they have. It's very real to them. So here's a question I have for you. If somebody came to you right now and said, I'm going to join the church. I very strongly believe in the LDS church, I should say. Mormons always say the church, like it's the only church. I'm going to join the LDS church. I read the Book of Mormon. I believe everything about it. What if you had to say something just to kind of maybe stretch their brain a little bit, what would be one of the first or second things that you would just point out? What do you feel are some of the bigger things that people can understand just on the surface that you could say, you might want to take a look at this? I know you have so many in your book. Are there a few that just really stand out as this should be so obvious to anybody that's exploring the Book of Mormon?
Well, I mean, if I were to really tell someone something that what I would do is I would actually pose a question to them. So I think if you don't mind, I'm just gonna read
Oh,
a part of
please,
my book. This is
please do,
part of in the
please.
conclusion. And so I do sort of basically sort of make an appeal to reason at the end. And so yeah, it's definitely not an argument that, proves like the truthfulness of Mormonism or something. I would basically read this to them, and so you can listen. The Book of Mormon tries to present as a companion to the King James Bible, or at least that's what Mormon missionaries would have you believe. However, within the faith itself, the Book of Mormon has total primacy. Above the Book of Mormon is Doctrine and Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price. However, the Book of Mormon is Joseph Smith's first work, and the legitimacy of the entire church and its congregation hinges on it. There is a great emphasis placed in the Mormon faith on bearing testimony that the Book of Mormon is true. I knew with absolute certainty that it couldn't possibly be true by the time I read First Nephi. I will highlight a story that is so completely ludicrous that it made me wonder if I could carry on reading this work. In First Nephi 4, we have the story of Nephi and his brothers Sam, Laman, and Lemuel. These hapless four are tasked with retrieving genealogical brass plates from a wealthy Jerusalem cosmopolitan named Laban. This is supposedly in 600 BC, and these four Israelites, who happen to be ignorant of their own tribal genealogy, need to contrive to steal their identity story back from someone who's hoarding it. The brothers ask nicely at first, but were quickly rebuffed with threats of violence and scurry away like scared mice. Nephi then returns later that night and finds Laban drunk. He decides to behead him, steal his clothing, impersonate him, and deceive Laban's servant into retrieving the plates. Nephi then absconds with the plates and runs off into the night with Laban's servant in tow. This delightful tale has absolutely no moral value whatsoever. It glorifies deception, condones shocking violence, has no metaphorical value, and is a patent mockery of the Old Testament religio-historical tradition. If, after everything I've written in this paper, you still believe that the Book of Mormon is true, read and reread this Nephite story. Would God really wait 1800 years to tell this absurd, morally bankrupt tale to a farmhand in upstate New York? Some Mormons might actually like this story, but what does this actually reveal? So, I'll just read slightly more. Um, this whole time I've been doing a scholarly analysis of the Mormon canon, but missionaries of the church want you to respond to the work by asking the Holy Ghost if it's true. In other words, they want you to emotionally validate the legitimacy of the work instead of accepting it through intellectual reasoning. The story of Laban can't prove that Joseph Smith is a liar, but I would ask you to read this Nephi story on a soul level and really ask yourself if it is the work of God when it has no moral lesson. In analyzing the Book of Mormon and creating this commentary, I have pledged to myself that I will maintain the utmost truthfulness in my approach as possible. If one is committed to speaking the truth, it becomes easy to spot a liar. So I think if I were to tell someone that's thinking of joining the church, like there's a lot of issues, the amount of money that they want. Like one thing I would bring up um is the fact that the tithe that the Mormon church talks about was always an agricultural tithe. Even Jesus, when he praises the Pharisees and their tithing, he's talking about mint and dill, and they had coinage. They had coinage in the first century, and so that right off the bat, that they are asking people to pay a Bronze Age, literally a Bronze Age agricultural tax in the modern era is absurd. Wasn't practiced in the Roman Empire like that. And so that right there shows that the church is a modern church. And I mean the Catholic Church, I think it imposed the tithe for some period in the Middle Ages, but like I mean they were just an authority that was collecting the tax. The Mormon church is not a government, and so they're literally collecting an agricultural tithe monetarily, and this was never practiced. But like the number one thing I would do if someone's thinking of joining the church is I would really ask them to really read that story and ask themselves if really, a magnanimous creator would really wait 1800 years to reveal that story.
I love that perspective. And unfortunately, in the LDS church, that story is often used to justify really bad behavior and sometimes atrocities, where it's the idea it's better that, one terrible thing happened than, everybody lose faith. So a lot of unfortunate things have happened in church history just based on that story, that sometimes God may ask you to do something that's really uncomfortable, like shunning your child or kicking them out of the house if they, aren't living the rules, or even more extreme in history where God may ask you to take someone else's life. So it's definitely a story that's been twisted. And you're right, when you read it in the context that you're reading it in, it's extremely problematic and like you said, even ridiculous. So that's why we love to talk to you. This is just great. So I think, Landon, I think I have one final question after maybe you ask if you have one or two more, then I have one more to end on. But this is just, I mean, I think we could listen to you all day. Is how I feel.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have you come back, especially after people start reading this book and absolutely hammering us with questions, and you too. I think we definitely will. But do you have a few follow-up questions, Landon? And then I think I have one more to end on.
I just have one. You've read you did a lot of study. You put a lot of effort into looking at Mormon history and looking at the Book of Mormon and its claims. How do you think the book was written,
Great question.
or who wrote it?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that undoubtedly, I think that Smith definitely, he was a very creative mind. I think that a lot of the creative stuff in the book, I think, was definitely his doing. As for the actual process, I think that his wife, what's her name, Emma Smith,
Emma.
Emma Hale, I think that she once mentioned that she was sure that a Bible was not used in the translation of the Book of Mormon. And right there is an immediate red flag. That whoever talked about how the Book of Mormon was composed was being dishonest. Because if she was there and she said no Bible was present, that's impossible. Because it's not just like it's 100% the King James Bible. And so it's to me it's rather odd like that God would need to rely on the King James Bible when even just regular people do their own Bibles. Like there's people that have done different versions of the Bible, and some reason God can't come up with one on his own. Like the diction would seem different if God composed the Bible. Like even between the Geneva Bible and the King James Bible, that one's pretty similar, but like the Coverdale or these sorts of different Bibles, there's a huge difference in the diction. And God needed to rely on the King James Version. So to me, the fact that she says that no Bible was present, that immediately says that someone's lying about something. Um, how do I think it was composed? I just simply think that I think that Cowdery was one of his conspirators, and I simply think that they just I think that it didn't happen in the time frame that they said. I think that there was another copy, and so I think that the copy that's on the Joseph Smith papers, the printer's manuscript or something like that, I think that that's a later version. I think the original version, the sort of the version that they brainstormed about, I'm sure it had tons of errors, and I'm sure that was burned in a fire somewhere in like 1828. They made sure that that would never be found. And I think that they just over probably a period of more than a year, they crafted the story. And I think that Smith wanted to make sure that the work couldn't be disproven. So I think he somehow had access to Adam Clark's commentary, which would probably be very easy because his wife was really involved in Methodism. Like he was huge in Methodism, Adam Clark. And so yeah, I think it was a very carefully thought out work. I think that Smith put a lot of effort into it, and I think that he tried to do his due diligence. I think he was a bright guy, and I think that he wanted to make sure that, you know, that it wouldn't be disproven that easily. And I think that he's creative, but you can see his full dependence on like a lot of the Book of Mormon stories, they really do seem like they're from like they're different versions of the Old Testament stories, a lot of them. So that's how I think that he did it. Um,
And so you do feel that there was some collaboration, some people helping him, sort of. I think a lot of people have kind of arrived at that, like you said, Oliver Cowdery, perhaps others.
yeah, for sure. But like I think it's lost to time. And to
Yeah.
be honest, I think the number one thing, I mean, I don't have proof about this. I don't want to, you know, slander the church in this regard. But I was thinking that if there was proof that the Book of Mormon were false, and the executives of the church had access to it, I don't think that information would ever come out. That's just my
Yeah.
opinion. And I mean, I don't know that for sure. Maybe the church would be honest. I don't want to, you know, imply that, but I'm saying that there is a possibility that even early in the church, that whatever evidence, like if somebody denied their testimony or whatever, I don't think, and they had like the record of it,
Yeah.
would you hear about it? I
Yeah.
don't know about that.
No, and there's precedence for that. When Joseph F. Smith, it was F, right? Not
Uh,
Fielding, Landon. I always get
yeah,
them
I
mixed up.
think
When he
he has a
discovered a
son with
version. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. His son, Joseph F. Smith and
Yeah.
Joseph Fielding Smith. I think they're father and son. Yeah.
Or uncle. Now I can't
Or
remember.
uncle.
Yeah. Do you remember Landon? Anyway,
Uh,
one of the prophets, Joseph F. Smith, the earlier one in the early
yeah,
1900s, he discovered a version, one of the first versions of the first vision, different. He found it in paperwork. He cut it out, hid it in a safe for a long time, decades, until scholars realized this has got to be there. They were able to, they saw reference to it in other sources. And he actually then took it out of the safe and scotch taped it back into the original document. So there
yeah,
definitely is precedence. We feel there's a lot of information that's out there that, we just kind of hear rumors of. And who knows, maybe someday. Were you aware that the church has massive granite vaults in a canyon in Salt Lake, where it's very mysterious? We're going to do an episode on this, where things are housed, records, microfilms, seeds for almost every plant in the whole world. And we feel like there might be something else out there. I don't know if we'll ever get access, but it's interesting. Mormonism is fascinating, that's for sure.
yeah. Um, yeah, I'd wonder what would be in that vault.
Yeah.
Um, I heard that I had remembered that another uh 20th century religion in the US, I think Scientology,
Mhm.
I heard that they did the same thing too. They have a vault with
Yeah.
a bunch of records and seats and stuff like that. So who knows why these different religions are doing that. But
Yeah. Who knows? It's all for the end of the world, I guess. So I guess my final question would be, this book is just incredible. We can't wait to get our own copies and really dive in. What is your hope for the book, and who do you think will read it? Who will be interested in, and what do you hope for it? Are you trying to engage in dialogue? Are you trying to educate? Or just what do you see happening with the book, and what's your hope for it?
well, I mean, originally I was originally thinking of sending it to Fair Mormon, but
Oh,
because it's not well known, I didn't think that they might read it or respond to it.
they
I
will
don't know if they'd
now.
like it. They probably wouldn't like what I wrote. But I just basically I thought that, someone might benefit from this. I thought I wrote it in a way that I was hoping that, secular scholars would benefit from it, Christian scholars might benefit. I was hoping that various people might take something from it, and I was also hoping that some of my information would be new. Like I also got to do, because I was analyzing the Book of Mormon passages, I also got to analyze do some textual criticism and commentary on the New Testament. And so like I was happy with myself how I I think I made headway on the, Matthew 6:22, with the eye is single. I feel that like I really researched that one and I thought that, basically to not spoil it, I basically translate that instead of it being if your eye is single, I translate it to if your eye is generous. And believe it or not, in the early first century, it was an expression among the Jews to talk about a generous eye or a stingy eye. And so I feel that because haplous, which is the word for single, can be, interpreted to mean generous, I feel that, a very difficult verse, I kind of sort of have a new kind of perspective on that. And I was just hoping that maybe, someone could learn from what I wrote, maybe learn something new. And I was hoping that maybe the Mormon Church might I was hoping that, maybe they might see that their doctrine has some flaws and they might, soften their stance a little, that there's a lot of people that, maybe they would make, tithing optional or something. Like I don't want to,
We hope.
finish the church, but maybe if they see that, there are problems in the doctrine, maybe it might humble them a little bit. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
I have one more question, and God bless you for thinking that. I think we've all wished that same thing and
Never
seen
say
exactly
never.
the opposite. They dig in even harder with the flaws and blame the people who find the flaws as the problem, not the flaws itself. But can you tell us why you decided to write this anonymously, basically?
Yeah, well, basically, the main reason why I decided to write it anonymously is that the church tends to attack you personally when you decide to come up against the church and they don't have a way of refuting your argument. So, I will tell one little detail about me that people might not know, and that is I'm on the younger side for writing something like this. And so I did notice that there are people out there that are very credentialed, that are very, very established in their fields and very well educated. And they even say something not even directed at the church. They just put forward a scholarly opinion that might conflict with the history or narrative of the Book of Mormon or the church. And they basically say that those people are not, qualified to do that. And I don't think that that's a valid argument. I think that I don't think you should necessarily say, oh, just simply say, someone, isn't qualified to do that, especially when they are qualified, very qualified. And I've seen them do it. I've seen apologists do it. I've seen the church do it. And I think that that the work will have a greater impact if, I don't really, if I'm not really publicly out there. And, you know, I just think that it's just better that way. I think that I want people to focus on the work. I don't want people to, necessarily, look at me or, these sorts of things. I just think that I just want them to consider the arguments. And if they absolutely have disproved me somewhere, I will gladly concede that they have a problem. But I'm not looking for fame or anything like this. I just have an honest message that I want to get out and I just hope that yeah, I would even hope that they would benefit from it too.
Oh, that's excellent. And I agree with everything that you said. And I feel like, of course, people will say, who are you? Come forward. That's always the thing. They don't understand reasons why people would be anonymous. But I do feel like just so much interest that you had on Reddit and people writing back and forth and engaging, and a few offering some apologistic arguments. I really do feel that you have started a dialogue. And I think after this podcast, also, you're going to have a lot more interest. And so I would say get ready. I think that you are going to have some back and forth, which I sense that you really welcome. And I think it'll be really a really interesting and useful exercise on both sides. You can help people understand some things, and they, of course, will try to get you to understand some things. And I just think it's a fresh new perspective. Don't you, Landon?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to make one correction. Mythos was right. Joseph Fielding Smith was the son of Joseph F. Smith. He was
Okay.
the great nephew of Joseph Smith.
Okay,
So,
I
uh,
felt when I was saying it that I was getting it wrong. And I did used to be a primary pianist. So I did have that song memorized. Remember the F, remember? And I must have blocked it out because I should have known that. So, yes, hopefully no one will criticize me for my earlier, but it was Joseph F. Smith that scotch taped that blessing back in, who was the great
Well,
nephew.
Joseph Fielding Smith
Fielding Smith. Yeah,
was the
right,
church historian. Yeah.
right,
Actually made,
exactly. Yep.
they made a song about that guy?
Well, what they did is in primary, and I know other religions do this too, and primary is the youth program and that you're in until you're 11 years old. It was a song to remember all the prophets. So,
Oh,
Latter-day Prophets are number one, Joseph Smith, then Brigham Young, John Taylor. You just sing the whole thing so that all the
right.
kids can. And the favorite part of the song to sing was David O. McKay, because you got to say the O. And it's so every kid in the church knows all the names of the prophets and then whenever there'd be a new prophet, it was exciting to see how are they going to fit him in? Are they going to write another line? Are they going to, kind of tweak the words? But yeah, I think a lot of religious traditions have that where the kids memorize the leaders, because in the Mormon church, prophets are, as you said, that's the word, right? It's not the scripture, it's the new word, it's the edict. I love that perspective. That was extremely interesting. And I have to think more about that because that you just picked that up. You could see that so clearly.
See, we're
Right.
stranger than you thought,
We
Mythos.
are stranger than you thought. Sorry. But yeah, was that very easy to spot the idea that it really is just run by edict after edict from generation to generation?
Yeah. And that especially becomes apparent because a lot of the edicts conflict. I mean, if it was one doctrine that remained the same, then, that criticism might not be fair, but like, I mean, it's changed just so much. And sometimes they reverse policies and then, you know, like, I don't know. It's problematic, but somehow the church still has millions of members. So,
Yeah. Yeah, but declining. They're not forthcoming
yeah.
on their statistics. We just attended a really interesting lecture by Jana Reese, who is a Mormon Religion News Service reporter, and the stats are really interesting. The church knows them, of course. I don't think there's any other organization that tracks it like they do. They count you every Sunday. They, know what you're doing, but they, of course, are not. I keep thinking if it was good news, they would release it. That's sort of how I feel. So. I don't know, but there was recently, I think 2 conferences ago, or maybe even last time, a statement made that said, unlike classic cars and comic books, the words of former or older prophets do not age well. So I feel like they're even starting to recognize the conflict. And I guess as soon as the current prophet passes away, the words are under the bus and we go with the new one. It's a hard way to live, because they can be very contradicting as far as what you're supposed to do.
I remember once when I uh visited a Mormon heavy state where I was, going to go skiing. I know that I went to go see a movie during my vacation. And there was a line in the movie, like it was a movie about sort of like a very insular sort of religion, like people like that were involved in it. And so there was this one point where this police officer basically, captures somebody from this sort of very insular religion, and so they're testing to see how devoted they are. And so one of the lines in the film that they were using to test this woman was with like, "Do you follow the prophet?" Right? And so as soon as that line came up, I noticed that the whole sections of the audience just got offended and left. And I was like, whoa, like it's
Yeah.
just a movie, you
Yeah,
know?
it's just a movie, but when you kind of have a spotlight shown, and of course maybe you're looking at another more culty something in the movie, yet Mormons have a prophet. You don't want to see yourself that way, right? How others might see
Yeah.
you. So,
Well, we don't even
yeah.
want to see ourselves as Mormons, or at least our prophet has said we're not Mormons.
Oh, that's
We're
true. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So that's an exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
One prophet says, "Call yourself Mormons." The other says, "We're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day
Yeah.
Saints," and calling yourselves Mormons is a victory
Yeah.
for Satan. It's
In,
Yeah. Your
in,
head spins.
in my work, I made an effort. I decided that I wasn't going to like. I know that there's some sources that do call Mormonism a cult, and I don't like that label because a little bit the label suggests that it's a religion you don't like.
Mhm.
So like I when I did my work, like I know that as somebody that has no membership in them, like I didn't feel right really sort of remarking on the authoritarian structure of the church. It's a sort of a very top down, it's a very strong hierarchy. But as somebody that doesn't have any insight on that, I didn't remark at all on that in my book. Like I just treated it as if it is just a regular sort of theocracy or religion,
Right.
But
And I think
I
that
know that
works.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that works well to do that because again, you don't have a dog in the fight. You're completely unbiased. You're just looking at this from a scholarly, historical, cultural perspective, and you can share your opinion and your views and your findings on that. I think that's why I think this is so completely refreshing. So, well, I feel like we've only scratched the surface. Is that how you feel, Landon? I feel like
Yeah.
but we'll
No,
end for now.
yeah, definitely. And we love your insight, and
Yep.
we
yeah,
we hope that if you've got another book coming out, let us know, or any ideas that you'd like to talk about. We'd love to have you on again.
Yeah.
sure, thank
No.
you.
Yeah, and I
That
feel
was
like I said, we run another book club. I feel once this book comes out, which you say is soon, I think a lot of people are going to start reading it. I think there's going to be a lot of interest. I feel like you're probably going to be, invited on some other programs because your perspective is just so it's just very unique, I think, and I keep using the word refreshing, but it really is. So, yeah, I will have you back on too, just to talk about some other issues come up because I'm very looking forward to see what the apologists think and how they will engage with you, which will be really interesting. So,
Thank
all
you.
right.
Well, it was a pleasure being on the show. So thank
Yeah,
you for
thank
having
you
me.
so much. Thank you. And
And
please,
again, the name of
everybody,
the
oh, go
book,
ahead. Yeah.
Behind the
Do you want to
Curtain
put the
of
slide up one more
Critical.
time as we end? Is that too hard to do at the end? Or
I can try to get that up, but it's Behind the Curtain, a critical analysis of Mormon theology and doctrine.
Yep,
So
by Mythos on Amazon. You can find it. That's right. So, everybody, please comment. Let us know what you thought about this conversation. If you go and get the book, please keep commenting. I think this is going to be an ongoing dialogue. It's absolutely fascinating. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And also, I should say, please forgive me for messing up the Joseph Fielding Smith, even when I tried to make the correction. It's been a long day. I do know what I'm talking about. So, if you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes of Mormonish come out, you can hit that notification bell. And if you'd like to donate or help financially support Mormonish Podcast, we have links in the show notes to PayPal, Venmo, and also mormonishpodcast.org where you can donate. And we so appreciate everybody that does. We absolutely could not do it without you. And a little bit of a new thing, we actually have Mormonish merchandise now. You can find that link in the show notes too. You can get hats, mugs, t-shirts, those kind of things. Show your support for Mormonish. We'll be sporting some of those soon, won't we, Landon? When it arrives, it's brand new. So, but yeah, a lot of fun stuff there. So, all right, everybody, thank you again. And we will see you next time on Mormonish Podcast. Thank you again, Mythos. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.